All right, so personal finance. Tonight, we're going to talk. Oh, well, first we'll talk a little bit about the market. Then we're going to talk about some retirement planning and some other issues. Big deal kind of this week, if you're watching it. Yeah, the market's dropping. It's huge news. And obviously based upon, the different people out there and their opinion on the overall political situation. They'll either try to portray it as the end of the world or no big deal. Regardless, again, putting your politics and your emotions and everything aside, when they talk about people losing money in the market and getting cleaned out and all that, smart money are, smart people are not losing a dime. People who are leveraged, again, using borrowed money that have, payments and margin calls and things like that going on, yeah, they're in serious trouble. But, again, that's a speculative position. That's not what we're talking about in personal finance. For anybody else, it's like, what should you absolutely do this week? For 99% of the people, it's absolutely nothing. And for the 1% of people who actually have some cash on the side, who didn't, already jump in a couple weeks ago like I did when they thought it was already hitting all-time lows, they would actually be buying. So Warren Buffett, he was one of the guys who took the other side of that bet, the Oracle of Omaha, very much not a politically, I think he's actually quite liberal, or at least supports those types of causes. But again, he's doesn't let his politics confuse his judgment. These old quotes and all these things, we've seen it all before. If you can keep your head. Actually, he's quoting Rudyard Kipling. But anyway, when other people are in a panic, that's actually the time to buy. So anyway, we'll see. And then the other couple other things. One, it will a market downturn. They want to portray that not everybody's selling. That's the one fallacy. Most people, younger folks, where I would assume almost all of this classes, they're still in the accumulation phase. So if anything, they're actually acquiring more. And then there's a huge portion of the population, just based upon the current economy, that hasn't been, serving a lot of the folks for quite a while. They're again unaffected. In fact, they probably have a bit of shot in Florida that the Wall Street's kind of getting clobbered, or at least, and that's their perception. Again, the only people in Wall Street that are getting clobbered are the people that are selling this week. Most people are just probably keeping their heads down. So 62%, but again, this sounds like a self-reported number. And so when you dig a little deeper, people have perhaps pension plans, 401ks, or it could be argued just about everybody in the state of Alaska has got, PFD. They're invested in different funds. But anyway, yeah, the bottom 50%, though, they're not deeply invested in the stock market, so they're not going to cry a whole lot of tears for some of the other folks who can probably weather the storm. The number of people who have huge stock portfolios are also the same sort of people that probably are not under any pressure to sell super quickly. So anyway, long term, this could have huge effects. In my mind, positively, not the stock market going down, but the fact that perhaps some manufacturing coming back to the nation. But that's straying outside of personal finance. But from a personal finance perspective, if you're smart about it, you're doing quite well. And we'll talk about diversification. In fact, did I mention that on here? Yeah, right up here at the top. Dollar cost averaging. So if you're dollar cost averaging this week, you're actually buying more shares due to the lower price and the diversification. Real estate doesn't fluctuate like markets do. It's not necessarily going down. In fact, I'm struggling to try and get a rental property. I'm trying to sell it because the market is quite hot for real estate. There's such a short supply. And crypto it's not where it should be, but it's certainly not reacting to this crisis. It's actually kind of flat for the past few weeks. Hopefully it'll be on an upturn soon, but it's not getting hammered. It's not losing the percentages that the stock market did the past couple days. Personal finance stuff, though, if I mentioned this a few weeks ago about some of the more interesting things out there. The Big Short, just a really well done movie, entertaining, highly accurate. There's maybe a little bit of politics in it, but not over the top. Well done, good show. Dumb Money, yeah, this is interesting. This is about the whole GameStop and what was it, AMC theaters and those other things. It's more of a dramatization. I mean, they take a pretty big artistic license in this because they make it sound like the little guy, beat up the big hedge fund managers. And tell you the truth, a lot of the little guys maybe didn't have the diamond hands that they purported to have, meaning that they didn't necessarily make their buy-sell decisions at the best possible time. And actually some professionals who were on the other side of the trades from some of the hedge funds did do quite well, but they were by no means, guys like, what was it, Raging Kitty or whatever his name was, in his basement. These were the same professionals, just a different suite of offices, and they knocked it out. But it was all about shorting. And in principle, it's a great thing. When you short a stock, if you overshort a stock, what they did in this concept, it's a little more too much to explain here, but there's only there's a finite supply of shares that were available. And when the people shorting, the big hedge funds, got maybe a little too greedy, this guy basically did the math and realized, this Roaring Kitty, and realized that there weren't enough shares available. These guys weren't going to be able to cover their shorts, and by him and all his buddies, his followers, getting together and holding and not selling, they really could get the market to manipulate quite well, and it was quite entertaining because usually the Dumb Money is reference to what professional Wall Street people think of the retail investors. And in this case, they sort of turned the tables on them, which, to tell you the truth, is not too different than crypto. Crypto is quite interesting because it was led by retail. And retail, the guys on the street kind of made all the big money. And now the big Wall Street people are coming in, but they're kind of late to the party. The big money in crypto that's been made, it could potentially be made again, but there certainly was a whole lot of money made at the retail level that the professionals never participated in. The Wolf of Wall Street, just a different kind of movie. I'm not going to recommend it in terms of, oh my God, the language, yeah, a little rough. Everything about it's a little rough. So, yeah, it's certainly not a work-friendly kind of movie. But it does illustrate the notion of the pump and dump. You'll see this guy, DiCaprio, generate fantastic amounts of wealth. I think it was Jordan Belfry was the guy's name. Anyway, but where did all this wealth come from? Dumb money. I mean, these are truly that's what they did. They preyed upon very unsophisticated investors, and it's pump and dump. A pump and dump means that it's always been done, but with the advent of the internet, the ability to broadcast a message and put your propaganda basically on steroids about stocks and hot tips and stuff, you can generate momentum on a stock and get that price to just skyrocket. And the underlying company, people aren't even paying attention. They don't care. They think they're making so much money. They don't do their research. They don't have research departments. They don't do their due diligence. Anyway, the people who orchestrate the pump and dump, they get in early and they spend all their time hyping it. And once the stock price gets to a certain level, they realize it's a house of cards. It's all going to come down. And so rather than wait for that to happen, they instigate it. Let's say that shares are trading for a dime or something, because they prey upon penny stocks, stocks that are trading for less than $1, because the SEC is not regulating them as much. There's not as many laws relating to them. So, Jordan Belfort, he went to jail for whatever number of years, but he would have gone, he probably would have got life if it would have been a, higher price stock covered by more SEC regulations. No, he chose the penny stocks where the rules and the enforcement is much less stringent. Anyway, they take a stock from like a dime, it runs up to $3, which if you're holding 1 million shares, that's a lot of money. And then boom, you sell all that all together on one day, and the price just falls out. And it happens in the stock market, and now with crypto, it's even worse. They talk about, there's all this terminology. There's a whole vocabulary related to crypto, and in crypto they would call that a rug pull, and they whatever. It's more complex. But anyway, if you're going to get into crypto at all, and you want to be smart about it, there's a class of people, they call themselves Bitcoin maximalists. They only invest in Bitcoin, and believe me, that's probably enough. I've got other stuff besides Bitcoin, all these altcoin things, but if I was to do it all over again, I would probably be a Bitcoin maximalist, because that's where the people, if there is a bit of whatever order and rational behavior in the market, it's probably with the Bitcoin coins themselves. The rest of it is just the Wild West. So that's about it. Yeah, Wolf of Wall Street. All those tactics are amplified in crypto because, again, it's they know the demographic that's doing it. People are desperate. They do these YOLO moves. They're realize they're not going to make it in the real big Wall Street. They're not going to be allowed to play, or not going to, whatever, they don't trust it, and they'll do some crazy moves. So, all right. So enough of that. Big picture, though, is, it's all interesting to watch, but if you hear some news person talk about the market lost trillions today, ask them who's selling, basically. If you didn't sell, you didn't lose. So I could. There's 2 days that matter: the day you buy and the day you sell. And if you're not doing either one of those, it's just noise, and just let it go. And also remember too that the news wants sensationalism. Very, very rarely on the financial channels they might mention if the stock market goes up by 500 points. But by God, if it goes down 500 points, it is going to be mainstream, especially if they've got an agenda. So, yeah, markets tend to ratchet up slowly, but when they fall, it's big news, and gains are normally not newsworthy. So, retirement planning. So, big picture with retirement planning is, I talk a lot about that in the course, and some of you just maybe, that's so far off. Well, the point is you're always saving for a goal, and so that goal typically is retirement. But it doesn't mean that you can't access that money beforehand. I've got a friend. We were out to dinner last night, and he's he's made more millions than I'll ever see, and he was telling me perhaps I should sell some stuff, and it was a kind of got to a philosophical thing where I'm like, why would I want to sell? I kind of got what I want, and it's funny. One last story before we jump into this. I was down in Belize, and we've been hanging out with a tour guide, and he knew I had horses and dogs and a fair amount of land and multiple vehicles and all that. And he's like, man, this guy must be pretty wealthy. And I wasn't, trying to portray that I was wealthy, nor am I super wealthy. But when he found out I had 2 4Runners, oh my God, he thought I was like the wealthiest man in the village. And, they cherish those things down there. And when I lived in Turkey, I was down in Turkey for 3 years in a little village on the Mediterranean. I was the only American. Well, I'd go down there on weekends, me and my big chocolate lab. And again, if the rest of this world gets too crazy, I again could go down to Turkey and be the richest man in the village and be perfectly fine. Everything's relative, But anyway, enough of that. Social Security. So Social Security is got to be out there. Don't worry about this whole defunding whatever. They do have to get rid of some of the fraud. They do have to perhaps update their IT systems and the rest of that, and you're getting kind of a glimpse of what's going to happen as AI takes a hold of a lot of industries. You can, if you're processing everybody's Social Security payments with typewriters and fax machines and everything else, it's going to take a lot more people than an automated system that's, modern. So hopefully streamline Social Security, get some of the fraud out of it, but regardless, it's not going away. But that being said, it's not a lot of money either. You need to go on the Social Security website. You need to look at how many quarters you got. That's how they do it, based upon your working quarters, and see how much money you're going to get. I had people working for me who I didn't pay them that much money, but my God, what I paid them was a lot of money compared to what they were getting from Social Security, and that's so if your entire plan is to live off your Social Security, you really don't have much of a plan. It will be there, but it will not be much money, so keep that in mind. Look at your numbers. But anyway, yeah, there's a certain number of credits. So credits, per year income, and it adds up, and it's based upon how much you earned. Social Security is also available for disabled, which is, it's kind of an additional thing to the program. Perhaps disabled should be funded out of a separate program, because Social Security is supposed to be kind of funded by the contributions. And so again, politicians will say, oh, let the disabled be paid for by Social Security. Well, that kind of puts an unfair burden on Social Security. Now, I'm not saying to kick the poor folks out in the street. I'm saying don't miscategorize them. This goes under a different, Medicaid type thing, a welfare type thing, rather than Social Security. But that's just me. Survivors benefits, yes, in case somebody's passed away. Children, for people who have been working. And also there's some contingencies where they're still going to school and things like that. But there's other survivor benefits that have sort of been added on. And again, if Social Security just was a kind of pay-as-you-go system, it might be more responsive to actually being solvent. Right now, the way they've got it going, it's when they say it's a Ponzi scheme, they're not really lying. A Ponzi scheme, Bernie Madoff, well, there's actually a guy named Ponzi way before Madoff, but Bernie Madoff was the latest iteration of a Ponzi scheme. What happens in a Ponzi scheme is you claim to have an investment, but you really don't have an investment at all. What you're doing is you, as this pseudo person who's organizing the investment. You have people out there who are investors, and they give you, say, $5,000, and all of a sudden you start making them payments of, say, a few $100s a month. They're like, wow, I'm doing all right for my minimal investment. But in a Ponzi scheme, rather than earning money on investments or anything, they just keep getting fresh meat into the system, fresh people into the system, giving that $5,000 each time. And what they do is they turn around and give that money to the people who have already been established in the program. And so it's at a certain point it runs out of people. The way that Social Security is like a Ponzi scheme is that they use the contributions from the current employees to pay the employees or former employees, the people that are now retired. So you have the working group making their contributions into Social Security, and those aren't really going into the lockbox. No, they're taking that money immediately and paying it to the beneficiaries, the people who are already retired. And this whole thing kind of sort of works if you have, say, baby boomers. If you have a huge swell in a population, a larger population working than you have retired, then you can do that scheme. But what's happened lately, as in the past, 30, 40 years after the boomer generation, the number of people that are working has been decreasing. And the number of people retired, that group has been growing. So now you have the amount of money coming in is less. And anyway, it's essentially that imbalance will bankrupt the system if something isn't done. But anyway, politicians want to be reelected, so contrary to what they say, people aren't realistically talking about eliminating Social Security or even reducing Social Security. In fact, they're talking about taking the taxes off of Social Security, so and Social Security earnings or payments or what have you. So don't believe the hype on that. But even its best case, though, it's not a huge amount of money. Depends on your income, number of years you've earned. So 40% of your annual income. I don't know if it's close to that. You have to, they're just using a round number here. You have to look at the chart yourself. You can start taking it at age 62, but they claim, oh no, you don't want to do that. You want to wait till age 67 because that way you can get more. And you can. Let's say right now if you're somebody who just turned, 62, your benefit might be, say $3,000 or $2,000, more realistic. And if you wait to age 67, your benefit would be $3,100. And so, wow, I should wait till age 67. That's a no-brainer. Not exactly a no-brainer. Number one, the number of years between 62 and 67, 5 years, you went by with no payments. So you have to put some value on that. And then what are you going to be doing with this money? If you're somebody who's got other money set aside, maybe you can invest that Social Security money and, dare I say, do better than the federal government in investing the money and perhaps, do. Anyway, a lot of different things about it. When you get to be that age, there'll be a whole nother, whatever the YouTube is 40 years from now, you'll take some sort of lesson and look at what your options are and decide, what you should do. Earn limited income. Yeah, this is kind of basically disincentivize working. If you're making $100,000 a year and you try and take Social Security, they're not going to give you anything. If you're on Social Security, your W-2 wages, the wages you get for working for somebody, are limited to about $22,000 a year. But if you're killing in the stock market, if you're selling real estate, if you've got rental property, you've got all kinds of other stuff, they don't care about that, at least not yet. So anyway, there's ways around that. retirees living longer. Yep, retirees continue to grow. And yeah, most people are just realizing that, especially if, let's look at this scenario where you just have Social Security and you're going to retire and perhaps want to live off $2,000 a month. That's going to be difficult if you don't own a home, or if you do own a home, you're still going to be paying property tax. It's just going to be a struggle, and your retirement years are not going to be quite what you hope they would be. So it should be more of a cushion, more of a safety net than a plan. So, but go to Social Security, look at their stuff. They've got the calculators in there, and it will, you enter in your data. They know who you are. You've got a Social Security number, and you just get that vibe when you're reading the site. They're going, yeah, this is how. They're not trying to sugarcoat it. They're trying to say, hey, do you really think you can live on this? I mean, this is what you're going to get, and if you can do that, we're not really trying to advise you to do this. We think you ought to, establish a 401k. We think you ought to, take some steps to look for some additional retirement monies. So, employer sponsored. So, this is the old school things, designed to help you, employers contribute. Most people who work for, company, if you're self-employed, it's on you. But if you're working for a company, typically there's some sort of program, and hopefully with a match. We'll talk about a match in a second. So, defined benefit plan. This is the old school thing. This is, it's less of a cafeteria plan. A cafeteria plan means you sort of pick and choose, and you set up your own retirement. Back in before my time, you go to work for General Motors or somebody, and you have a retirement. And I think some of the public sector retirements may still be like that. Federal government, perhaps, but there are fewer and fewer of those plans. And it's not really employers. It's not necessarily employer greed. What happened, a few years back, is employees gravitated to the employers that offered the maximum amount in earnings. So let's say there's a company that'll pay $80,000 with full benefits, and another company will offer you $100,000 but zero benefits. Well, what the employers found was most of the employees, most of the job seekers, they gravitated towards that higher wage. And so, the cost, the management, all that other stuff were going up with these huge benefit plans, and they were kind of underappreciated. So a lot of employers said, well, screw that. We can offer $100,000 too. And now we're not giving benefits anymore. So it's not to say that the employers are absent of greed, but some of the employees kind of drove them that direction by showing a preference towards all-out dollars in terms of that. Now, if you do go to work for a company that's got some sort of plan, even like a matching plan where they contribute to your retirement, if you just say go to work for this company for 6 months and then you bail on them and think that you're going to take, the corporation's part of their retirement contribution, you're probably wrong. You probably did not read the fine print. I worked for one of the companies. It's kind of funny, Booz Allen Hamilton. They've been in the press a lot because they did some not so nice things, and that's kind of why I quit working for them, because they did some fairly shoddy business practices that and whatever. Long story. We'll stick with personal finance. But anyway, they used to be a pretty well-respected firm, but then they changed some things up. But the vesting thing was pretty straightforward for them as a corporation. they contributed towards your retirement through a match system. So if I put up 4%, they would contribute 6 for a maximum. I'd end up with 10% of my salary being put towards my retirement. So this illustrates a match. If I didn't put up the 4%, well, they didn't put up the 6. So it behooves you. In fact, you are leaving money on the table. If there's a match available, you need to do whatever you got to do to contribute at least that much to your retirement plan. You can contribute 8 or 9 or 10%, whatever, up to the legal limit. But at least you want to do enough to max out your match. Otherwise, you're working for less than your coworkers. Well, anyway, if you do that in that sort of scheme where they're contributing to your retirement and you decide to walk after 6 months, in the fine print you would read that all of that money, that match money, reverted back to them. They're not giving you a dime of that. Now, I think it was after 3 years, you got to keep 50% of it. So they kind of had you buy the whatever to force you to at least put in 3 years. Otherwise, you quit it 2 years and 8 months and they're almost happy about it because they get to take all that money back. And then I think their scheme was at 5 years, you got to keep it all. So, again, they had some incentive over you, or some whatever coercion, whatever you want to call it. That you were likely to stay with the company, which what they wanted, because obviously hiring people is expensive. They don't mind firing you, and again, you wouldn't be vested because you got fired for cause. But if you left on your own, you would not be taking that money with you. So that's the concept of vesting, that you weren't considered vested until you put your time in, basically. And these are done by the company, so whatever the terms are, read the fine print. Defined contribution plan. So this is where it's a retirement plan, but you contribute, but you have more control over it, right? This one is defined benefit plan. It's kind of equity versus equality. Again, not to get, this would be basically equity, where the outcome is established at a pre-whatever level. This one is more equality. This is the input is the same, but how much money you end up with the rest at the end of it, that's on you. So if I haven't already alienated all of you guys by talking about Tesla and everything else, I probably took out a few more right then, because I don't mean anything political by that. But what I'm saying is that in a defined benefit plan, the amount is going to be where is it? Defined benefit. The amount's going to be established. It's going to be a fixed amount, and in a contribution, only the input is fixed, and the output is on you. Okay, so contributing to a plan. Yeah, people always wait too long to save. They don't understand the time value of money. Start saving at an early age, but hard to do if you're, bought a bunch of stupid things, or you're mired in student debt, or other things. So, small percentage from each paycheck. Pay yourself first. We know all those lessons. Money contributed. This is where I'm talking about with the where they're paying you, some sort of match system is how most of these contribution plans work. You put up 4%, we'll put up 6%, and it's literally extra income. I worked these guys. I was paid pretty well, but I did their employee stock purchase program, bought the stock at a discount and sold it. I took the match to the max extent. For my pay level, I was making, as much as was humanly possible. Investing funds. Yeah, they usually are associated with a certain company. like I say, these guys also had these kind of lame mutual funds, and I tried to get control of my money to invest it myself because I was under the impression I could do much better than they could, and I did. I smoked them. I was much more aggressive, obviously, and it was an up market. But yeah, the limited choices they gave me, they were very stodgy, just very conservative funds, and not my investment style. So I was down here in the high risk. This is, again, sort of this oversimplification where people at a younger age should have a higher percentage of high risk investments, and people as they get older should transition to more medium risk, and then at a higher, more elderly, you should be in very much just low risk investments. And so the reason why you'd want to do this is, if you're living off your investments and you're having to make regular withdrawals, you're having a bad week because you're being forced to sell this week when prices are not good. Again, if you're not living off your investments, then what do you care? All things, the market will go back up, but how long will it take? Is it a 2 week? Is it a 2 month? Or is it a full scale 3 or 4 year kind of thing? If you're an older person, you got 12 years left to go. 1/4 of your life you're going to be in a diminished state, whereas if you would have had it in a very low risk investment, it probably wasn't affected at all. Again, you're getting clobbered by inflation. You're not participating in all this that's going on, all the growth, but the trade-off is that you've got fairly, you can sleep at night when we have a bad week like we're having. So, up to you. Contributions. So yeah, I updated these for 2025. You can contribute up to $23,500. Now, if you're over 50, again, what have I done? I need to catch up. Yeah, you can contribute more, but again, you can double up to catch up, but it's just not going to be the same as if you would have been doing this when you were younger. These people are, they're above 50. They realize they haven't done much for their retirement. They're in bad shape. Matching contributions, we hit that. Inflation adjustments. And, so if you want to take money out of your account before age 59 and a half, you're going to, number one, it's going to come back to you as income, so you're going to get taxed on it. All these things are tax deferred. And I don't think I've hit that hard enough. Tax deferred means, let's say you're making $100,000 a year, and for round numbers, let's say you're going to contribute $20,000 to your 401k. You could take that $20,000 before you pay taxes on it and invest it in that fund. So when you go to pay your taxes at the end of the year, you essentially report, earned income of not $100,000, but only $80,000, because $20,000 of it was put in a tax deferred account. And deferred means exactly what it says: deferred, delayed, whatever. Meaning that you don't pay taxes on it now, but when you withdraw it, when you're in your retirement years, you pay taxes on it then. But let's say you're just living off your investments in your retirement years. Well, you're not going to be a very high tax bracket. So let's say you're doing pretty well. You're making whatever, 100, 150. You're paying a moderate amount of taxes. And you're thinking, in my retirement years, I'm just going to be living off of those savings. So I'm not making much at all. And I'm going to withdraw that money then, and I'm not going to pay high taxes. So that works if, a couple assumptions, you don't expect tax rates to go way up in the future, which I don't know if that's a good or a bad bet. And then the other thing is that you're going to be one of these traditional retired people. Personally, I don't think I'll ever retire. I mean, I do what I like, and if I make some money in it, that's good. But I'm not going to quit working to, whatever. My work is what I would do if I were retired. It just happens to correlate. So, anyway, if you're in that sort of position, your income may not necessarily go down, and so you'd be in the same tax bracket. But regardless, now if you take it out though, if you put some money in a 401k and you say, oh man, I got 50,000 in there and I got a problem, right? I want a new boat and I really want it bad, and I'm going to pull 30 grand out of my 401k. Well, you can pull 30 grand out, but number one, you're only at $27,000 because they're going to take that 10% penalty right off the top. And then they're going to add that $27,000 onto your $100,000 of your regular income, and they're going to, put you in a little higher tax bracket and take it out. But the good news is there's what they call hardship withdrawals. We're going to review that here in just a second. I can kind of quote them, but I want to find the actual. We'll reference another document here in a second. So, matching contributions, yep, 401k. So, don't get too wrapped up if you go, well, no, 401k, I'm not working for like a publicly traded corporation that has a 401k. I have, I work for I'm a school teacher. Okay, it's an educational institution, so it's a 403b, whatever. Same program, different number. Well, but I'm self-employed. Well, then there's a self-employed deferred program. There's, all these different programs written in the tax code. And whether it's a 401k or even a traditional IRA, they're all the same tax deferred thing. The only strange one of the bunch is the Roth IRA. Roth IRA is cool, and we'll talk about that in a second. Oh, there it is, Roth IRA. Sorry. Yeah, so Roth IRA is what this is. They'll call it, they call it a Roth 401k or a Roth IRA. Roth is just a dude's name, the senator or whoever put this thing in. But in a Roth plan, and this is actually could be a quite good deal. You put the money into the account after taxes. So, if you're making $100,000 a year and you contribute, say, $5,000 or whatever $1,000 to your Roth IRA, the limits are lower because they don't allow you to do quite as much because it is a pretty good deal for you. But you put that money in a Roth IRA and you're making $100,000 a year, well, you're still paying $100,000 on you're still reported $100,000 income. There is no tax deferred basis to a Roth IRA. But what is the Scooby, the little benefit you get of the Roth IRA is that since it's designated for retirement and since you can't pull it out till age 59 and a half, that money when you withdraw it was already taxed once and it won't be taxed again. So the contributions were taxed when you submitted it, but all the earnings and hopefully that money has amassed, none of that is taxable, which is huge. So Roth IRAs are pretty cool. 403b, so nonprofits, so schools, things like that. SEPs, yep, single employees, so you're working for yourself and you still want to take advantage of this. Simple. So again, don't get too wrapped up about the different programs. Just know that tax deferred programs are available to pretty much everybody. Profit sharing, a whole different animal. This is based upon the profits of the company, and they can do some unique things. You'll see employee-owner type things. There's some neat stuff. I mean, I know a guy who's here in the state. I mentioned the name. You guys probably know him. But anyway, he realizes he's going to die at some point. Can't take it with him. And so he's, made all his stuff employee-owned, and it all reverts to the employees once he passes. So, kind of cool. Employee stock ownership program. Yep, this is where bought companies. And again, I did not keep the company. One, because I didn't like the company, but even so, I don't want to work for the same company that I invested in. That's kind of putting all your eggs in one basket. Manage your retirement company. You roll it over, okay? You don't withdraw it. If you get a check with your name on it, you've blown it. And especially if you're not 59 and a half, because you've taken a withdrawal. And you don't want to do that. When you switch companies, these guys know what they're doing, but you can still find a way to screw this up. So you want to make sure that you use that key terminology, rolling over from one IRA to another, rolling over a 401k to one other. When you get this check, if you even get the check, normally it would be sent between the institutions, but it would say for the benefit of. And so you can't go to the bank and cash this directly. No, it needs to go into another similarly classed, retirement account. KEO, again, pre-tax income into a retirement account. So same sort of thing. Tax deferred. SEPT, 1 to 10 employees. So there's whatever employment situation you find yourself in, there's a plan there's to match it. Traditional IRA, again, tax deferred. 59 and a half is this key age. After 59 and a half, you can withdraw the money, and it's just, there's no penalties associated with it. Roth IRA. And taxpayers may contribute additional. Remember what we saw where it went up after age 50, you could, contribute more money. Comparisons, yeah, you have to, typically, you'll max out your Roth, and then you'll roll into traditional IRA. I've had both, and you can have both. You don't have to have, either or. I would typically have the Roth and the combination of traditional IRA, 401k, the rest of those. So this marginal tax rate, trying to know what the tax is going to be in the future when you withdraw it, that's a gut check or a gamble. Okay, let me look at this real quick. My apologies that I didn't look this before. I was trying to look at the contribution limits before to make sure we had the numbers right, update the slides. But they call them a hardship withdrawal, which means it can be done without penalty. So this is straight from the IRS site, hardship withdrawals. In my mind, a lot of them are not that much of a hardship. The loans, number one, we mentioned you could do that. You can always get a loan. You can go up to 50% of the value typically, and you pay the interest back to yourself. So a lot of times the IRS, you kind of see where they kind of run you down the rabbit hole because they have to be very inclusive, and so you end up with all these different terminology like safe harbor and stuff. What the? Anyway, but immediate and heavy financial need based on the terms. So consumer purchases generally not considered. Yeah, if you get audited, meaning generally you're going to end up in a bad way. But if you can make the case, your lawyer who's getting paid quite well is going to have to argue quite diligently to, pull that off. But here's some of these safe harbor distributions. So a distribution is basically a withdrawal, not a rollover. If you see distribution, withdrawal, any of that, that means there's penalties to be paid unless you can get under one of these categories. But these categories, why are you pulling this money out? What is the emergency? Well, medical care, I could kind of see that as being a pretty important thing. That's cool. Well, related to principal residence, excluding mortgage payments. So, whatever the earthquake tears off half of my house, I could actually tap at that money. So you can see why saving retirement is not a bad thing, because you can reach out there and grab it. Tuition, well, that's kind of cool. I want to, change my life. I'm job locked. I want to do something different, and I've been contributing this 401k. I'm going to reach in there and do that. Eviction expenses, funeral expenses, damages to the personal. So again, limit. Again, they may call you on this if you pull out $50,000 to fix, a fence or something, and you also end up with a new boat along the way. But there's a lot of things in here that are, medical is a hardship, but tuition, I don't know. Anyway, these are within the guidelines of the IRS. So, another reason to have money tucked away in that retirement account in case you really need to reach out and grab it. You've got something, which is cool. Okay, annuity. Annuities just kind of thrown in here with this section. Annuities are kind of cool. I mean, annuity, I don't know, it's Latin. I guess it's Latin. Anyway, it means annual. It means a series of equal payments, just like years would be. It's like life insurance, but kind of just the opposite in terms of an annuity is kind of cool in the fact that the longer you live, the more you get paid, whereas life insurance, the only way you get the money back is by dying, at least on term life insurance. So if you sign up one of these contracts, and again, these are sold by insurance companies, which is kind of a downside because they can be kind of complex, and so they need a salesman to explain it to you, and so he's going to take a charge. So that's not great. And the money's going to be invested by an insurance company, and that's not great because they usually aren't the best at investing. But just the same, let's say you get a good annuity and you dump $10,000 in there, and they start paying you $100 a month forever. Forever meaning the rest of your natural life. And if that ends up being 2 weeks from now, that's not good. But if it ends up being 20 years from now, woohoo, you're making money. So again, I'm just pulling these numbers out, but that's how annuities work. They pay you a series of payments, and they can be fixed, variable, whatever, different types of annuity. They can be a little complex, but some people will have that as a component of their retirement plan. They're going to say, look, I want to, when I retire, Social Security is only going to give me this much money. I'm going to buy an annuity that will give me a guaranteed extra $1,000 a month. And it's correlated to the fact that I'm going to live forever. If I die next week, well, guess what? My living expenses went down considerably, right? But if I live forever, this annuity is going to keep paying. So there is some rationale to it, and it's kind of a bet. And you, if you're on the winning side of that bet, that means you're living. So it's kind of cool. But anyway, variable annuity and fixed annuity. So this one depends on the performance of the investment vehicles. High fees because you got that salesman involved. Surrender charge. If you pull the money out, the actual cap that's in there. Commissions to salespeople. Hit on that. Look for no-load annuities if that product exists. I haven't seen those. So, this whole thing, we covered this on day one. We talked about you start saving money early on and the compound value, 40 years, we're talking a significant amount of time. 6%, you could really be getting probably about 10% in the market. But anyway, you can turn a little bit of money into a lot of money. $5,000, 6% again. 6% is maybe 6% with inflation figured in. Figuring you're getting 10%, but you're going to lose 3 or 4 due to inflation. So maybe more realistic that way. And obviously, as the interest rates go up, the return goes way up. To get 12% consistently, you're doing well above average. But again, you're doing your term papers now, hopefully. You're looking at some of those mutual funds that are getting pretty sweet returns. That's the reason not to have your savings parked in a checking account. And this week, probably don't want to look at those things. You probably just want to let it go or zoom out. Look at it over the course of 5 years, and you go, oh, that's just a blip. This takes us back to like last fall or something like that. It's in the big scheme. Yeah, it looks bad, but when you zoom out, it doesn't look so bad. Tax benefit from a retirement account. Yeah, so it depends what your taxes would be. I mean, they're gonna push you if you take it out as a huge sum of money, 2.2, and 25%. So yeah, saying bye-bye to $550,000. Yikes. Okay, so what we talked there, we were talking about retirement planning, which you think, oh, okay, that's kind of like estate planning. No, estate planning means that you've left the building. Elvis has left the building. You're gone, and this is what your children, your beneficiaries, or whoever you were gracious enough to leave the money to you. They joke about, you want that final check to the nursing home to bounce, but most people don't have that kind of. Well, thankfully, they don't know the exact date they're going to die, or they'd probably freak out. But odds are, if you manage your affairs successfully, you hopefully have a little bit extra money left over. And that leftover money is your estate. You're gone, but your estate lives on. So the assets of a deceased person after all the debts are paid. So the first thing that happens is they gather everything up, and usually a lawyer's involved, and they put it all in a fund, and they pay everything out, and they sell the car, sell this, sell that, and they come up with what's left into the estate. Estate planning is can have a huge effect on how this thing happens. So there's a bunch of terms we'll talk about. One of the primary ones is a will. A will, don't let people give you multiple definitions for a will. A will is a legal request. So legal, why do they just don't say a written request? Because if it's verbal, it's not legal, okay? It needs to be a written request. And for it to be legal, wills are administered by the probate courts. The probate courts are a specific court that deals with estates. Probate courts are state courts. So we've established you need a will, and then we say legal. Legal in every state means it needs to be written, but also it means it needs to be conforming with that state. So if you move from state to state, I was living in Montana and then I moved to Alaska, and you need a new will. If you don't have a will, that's bad, very bad. You caused people a lot of problems, and you were hoping for your estate to be transferred to the beneficiaries. That's not going to happen very easily now. It's going to go by law, but it's going to have to go in a probate court. Lawyers going to get their cut, and frankly, the court's going to get to it, but they're kind of overworked, and nobody really cares. And, the fact is, if you die without a will, you really didn't care either, so you can't really bitch about this one, because that's kind of their attitude. If you didn't care enough to have a will, we don't care to, jump through whatever to take care of your situation. So If you die without a will, you die intestate, meaning without a will. And that's, if you're somebody who's living in a boxcar and you got nothing, that's just kind of, the way you roll. That's how your life was done. But if you're somebody with some assets and you don't have a will, that's pretty irresponsible. You really, if you had surviving children, they just kind of, your funeral's not going to be a happy occasion. People aren't going to be missing you too much. They're going to be kind of upset because the courts aren't going to be quick to act. Money's going to be straggling out. Even if it's going to get to the kids, it's not going to be as much because the delays, the court costs, you just didn't plan it out. So you need to do that. So estate planning starts with having a will. Okay? Reason for having a will, yep, as you desired, receive the part of it, intestate, dying without a will, court appoints an administrator. This is not going to be the top of the law school graduate. There's no Harvard grads going, oh, I'm going to go. No. This is, some whatever. Not the best. In the lawyer field, that's a pretty wide aperture. Not the kind of person you want looking over your affairs. And so, anyway, don't let that happen. So you need a will. It needs to be done in accordance with the state. And then the people, the beneficiaries, because you're not going to be here. You're not going to say, oh, it's in whatever filing cabinet, or your house burns down and you and your will both go up in smoke. None of these are good plans. So you need to have a will. Maybe put it in the possession of the beneficiaries, or maybe put it in a safe deposit box, a fireproof safe, something, but let people know where it is. Create a valid will, minimum age 18 to 21, depending on the state, so it's going to be 18, right? Because, again, it's a legal document, a legal contract. If you're under 18, you're not signing contracts. Mentally competent, so, yeah, do it before you, whatever. Not under the influence if somebody's got a gun to your head, signed and dated, witnesses, all that rest of that. Attorneys are recommended. So this isn't that difficult, and it's a fairly easy process, especially with forms and word processing and the rest of that. This isn't going to take a tremendous amount of money. Paralegals are kind of like lawyers, but they work at they can handle stuff like this no problem. And I've done wills numerous times, mainly when you move from state to state, and just not a big deal. You don't need to bring witnesses. The way I've always done it, you go into the office, they go in there a few days before, they ask you a few questions, they come back, they show you the will, it goes, this look good? Cool. You're working with a paralegal at this point. And then they say, okay, here's the lawyer, he's going to review it. Maybe the paralegal could do his own review, her own review, his whatever. And then they say, okay, whatever stray customers, employees, whoever happens to be walking by, they come by and witness it. You don't know them. That's not, to be legal, doesn't matter. They just sign just that they're not beneficiaries, and boom, you're done. So this whole notion of, a holographic will or a living will, some of these things are just completely different documents, or, none of that's not a legal will. There's only one will, and it's the written one. So they start going through that. Now, there are some things in the law if you die intestate, or if you have a will that just says distributed by law, that's fine, because that's written. There's no judgment involved. It doesn't need to go, to probate court to sort that out. Or if it does go through probate court, it's just a rubber stamped. So the thing with wills is you can do two things wrong. The first thing is not to have one, but the second thing is to make it too specific. You don't have to. You can just put by law, and that will probably serve you for life, because there's not going to be really any changes that need to be made. If you get remarried, you could make those sort of changes. If you end up single, but again, if you put by law, there's a succession that's spelled out in the state law, that if you agree with it, that it goes to the children in equal shares or something like that. However it's written, you can just say, yeah, I'm good with that. But you can get in real trouble by making it very specific, by saying, and my piece of property at such and such is going to be transferred to this person, or you start putting names and other things in it. You make it very specific, and when that life situation changes, or those people, you sell that property, now all of a sudden your will becomes invalid. So it's usually better to have a fairly general will, but again, I'm not a lawyer. My legal advice is worth obviously what you're paying for it. So don't put any stock in it. But anyway, having a will and making it more general than specific is probably a great plan. Usually by percentage. Executor collects dates. So again, there's going to be some administrative fees. This lawyer, again, it's kind of grim business, but that's part of the lawyer gig. Guardian, yeah, if you've got children, hopefully your children are going to be of sufficient age by the time you pass away. This whole funeral arrangement, now they're starting to get into specifics that are, this may not, if they can find the will, the location of key financial documents, you're probably a little late in the game. Most financial documents are online, but things that are not, they should be kind of kept with the will. Maybe, an inventory of things. Things like passwords and stuff. Most of that with the death certificate, those accounts can get access to them, so not such a big deal. Changing your will, so yeah, move from state, marry, divorce, major changes, depending on how specific you made it. Codicil, most cases they just print out a new will. It's not like somebody's hammering away at a typewriter now has to retype the whole document. Now they just have to hit print again, so it just makes it cleaner to generally establish a new will. Probate's that legal court, probate court. The executor, generally a lawyer who's going to do all this stuff. Finally, there's a bank account opened up in your name. There's debits and credits going in and out. Things are paid off. Money comes in as assets are sold. And then, boom, there's a distribution. Yep. And you can make special provisions in there. But again, if you're not giving to a specific charity or something like that, my brother, Edward Smith. Well, if you're dying, poor Edward's probably, he's pretty long in the tooth as well. So anyway, you're putting a lot of specifics in here that may or may not be necessary. And then he's got other things. This guy's putting a lot more into it than I've ever done. And I'm not saying he's got a better product. I'm saying he's making it too specific and it's going to cause problems. But that's between you and your lawyer. Estate taxes, it depends. The people who get hit on this are the farmers. Because a lot of times there'll be a family business and they'll have it, maybe, the estate under the person, the older farmer. And when that generation dies, the young generation that's currently working the farm, they get hammered and they can't pay the taxes and have to sell the farm. I mean, that's the scenario that always happens. Not always, but the doomsday. But don't let that happen. There's ways to get around this. You do estate planning. You meet with the lawyer before you're even ill. You know this is going to happen. Nobody lives forever. So you put your farm into some sort of trust or corporation, LLC, something, and people have different shares in it. And so when you die, the farm doesn't die, the entity. If you had a sole proprietorship, when you die, the business died. If it's in an LLC, that LLC, corporations live on. So, that's where the planning comes in. We'll talk more about that sort of thing in another week or two. But anyway, this is where the planning can make a huge difference. So, but most of these estate taxes kick in when you hit the millions. If you're somebody who's down in modest ranges, you're typically not going to be subject to estate taxes. But probate is a state thing. If you're in California, there's probably going to be some estate taxes. New York, same way. So depends on the state. These are old numbers, so we're talking federal. Keep in mind, states can jump in there. State taxes may apply. Okay, again, I don't mean to Google everything here, but just because I brought up California. Everybody loves to beat on California. I mean, with good reason. State taxes, California. Oh, look at that. So, according to that guy, $2019. So they haven't done any new stuff on this. $15,000 annual gift tax. That's different. Nope. Again, it doesn't look like they have an estate tax right now. So, anyway, that's always something that's from a political sense where they're talking about imposing it, and they always use that farmer thing because they can really, make the case for that. But $11 million, that's a pretty nice farm in some states. So yeah, if you're that high wealth, you can go ahead and hire that lawyer. If you're up in the $11.4 million estate range, your lawyer will tell you what to do. Trusts, yep. So you set up a trust. Trustees, there's different ways to do this. You could also, if you didn't want your property, whatever. There's a lot of times if you've got a nice piece of land and you don't want to see it turned into a bunch of apartments or condos or something, there's things to be done there too. Living trust, revocable trust, irrevocable trust. Now we're getting into things. What you can do, let's say you've got a big chunk of property and you give it away to charity when you're older, or let's say you're a person of modest means and you ended up living on a large piece of property. Now this piece of property, it's been assessed by the tax authorities to be worth millions and millions of dollars, and you don't have that kind of money. You're the property taxes, you're going to end up losing this property because you don't have the funds to pay it. You can get into a situation where you can, talk to the tax authorities. Up here you talk to maybe Great Land Trust or Farmland Trust if it's a farm or something like that. And you can say, look, I want to stay on this property for the rest of my life, but I don't want to be paying property taxes. And in consideration for that, I'm going to, upon my death, I'm going to turn this property over to the state. Or I'm going to sell the development rights, meaning it's going to stay agricultural land. There's all sorts of cool things you can do. And now that's not going to be a revocable trust. That's going to be an irrevocable trust, because you can't say, I changed my mind, I'm going to put condos on it because the kids, now that I'm dead, my greedy little kids want to put houses all over it. So yeah, the borough is not going to agree to a deal that you can back out of. So revocable means, I changed my mind. Irrevocable means, nope, it's stuck. So That's how they're going to do it. Living trust is kind of a different thing. I have a daughter who was going to a school down in Georgia, big private school, and in the middle of this private school, it was like a big donut built around this sort of manor house, and this guy was in that sort of situation. Big affluent neighborhood. He had a nice house right in the middle of it. Couldn't afford the taxes, and so he made a deal with the taxing authorities to donate that land to the school upon his death. That'll do. He was like 93 and still going strong. The school was so mad because, yeah, their whole expansion plans were delayed, and this guy would not die. It was quite entertaining. And it was a Catholic school, too, so they can't really say how upset they were that he wasn't dead yet, but they certainly were. Standard Family Trust, credit shelter. So anyway, different things can be done if you've got the money. And you're in that sort of situation, look at your options. And that's what you're going to aspire to do. I mean, these people can do some great, powerful things with their money and kind of give back. So that's kind of cool. Gift tax, $15,000 per year. That's gone up a little bit. I think it's $19,000, I want to say. Anyway, contributions to... Yeah, if you want to give your money away, nobody's going to be charging any taxes. So there is kind of a way to recoup, definitely for some of these high wealth individuals. And if you're somebody who's got a $20 million estate and after, 11 million, 40% of it's going to be given away in taxes, well, all of a sudden you feel pretty charitable since you can kind of steer that money to your cause rather than it have, end up in just the general government fund. So... yeah, I'm not going to get into living will because I don't like the confusion. That's just, how things are going to go. That's not personal finance. Power of attorney, I will talk about that though. Power of attorney, that people will just, and these authors, will throw these terms around. Powerful attorney is a very, very dangerous thing. What that enables, it enables somebody to work on your behalf. So there's a thing called a general power of attorney, which if you've got, generally these are drawn up by an attorney. And if you issue a general power of attorney to somebody, you probably need to get a new attorney. Because you have just given that other person to do anything on your behalf. So, unless it's your spouse or your child or something like that, you really shouldn't be doing this. But if you are, and the way I've always used power of attorneys, or maybe I've got somebody taking care of my kids on the weekend, when they were young, and you gave them a power of attorney to, act in their best interest, for medical issues if they take them to the hospital or something. This was when I was overseas. I'm not sure how it worked here in the States. But I've done it a number of times where your military sense, you'd be moving from one place to another. You're leaving behind a car, or it could happen here in Alaska. You're going to be down in a different state, and you didn't get everything done before you left, and so you need somebody to sell your car for you. And for that person to act on your behalf, you need to get them a power of attorney. Now, in this state, you actually go to the DMV, and they have a specific form. You fill out that power of attorney. But again, it allows somebody to act on your behalf. So power of attorney is a very powerful document. So just be careful. Normally, you should always say limited power of attorney and specify, in regards to my, 1968 Corvette, this person has the ability to sell it or whatever. Otherwise, you may come home and the whole house may be gone. Durable power of attorney for health. Again, health decisions, a little different. So where to keep these documents? Yep. Someplace safe, convenient, but also not hidden. The people who this is estate planning. You're dead. You cannot tell them where they are, so they need to know beforehand. And there's nothing wrong with having multiple copies. So estate planning, life insurance, yeah. I mean, they'll probably figure it out once you quit making the policy things away. Hey, this person, but you're doing estate planning, which means you did other planning. You should not have life insurance policies if you're in, elderly You should have done term and done what. That's up to you. Retirement account, home ownership, mortgage. Yeah, all this stuff is kind of recorded. Maybe list of what it is. Personal loans, credit card debt information. That's kind of volatile. That's going to change. It's available. Personal legal documents. If there's some stray documents, but the big thing is the copy of the will. Copies of the will. Ideally, not all in the same place. Yeah, and I'm not so worried about this. You know, again, the mail's going to start showing up. It's like, oh, wait a minute. Maybe they're all online accounts, but you could go back and you could, look at IRS records and see who's paying the dividends. You could reconstruct a lot of this. I guess you can make it easier by having copies of statements in there, but I wouldn't get lost. All righty. So, pretty cheery subject. Estate planning, retirement planning, but necessary. So, continue to work on your plans, and oh God, even longer. All right, good enough. Talk to you soon.